Good afternoon or good day. My name is Max Reiboldt. I'm President and CEO of Coker Group, and this is part 2 of our Urology Grand Rounds discussion on leadership based upon the differing generations in our country. In our first session, we looked at some of the data and statistics, and we drilled down even more relative to urologists between the 3 major generations that exist. By way of quick review, that includes the baby boomers, which are nearing the end of their work life, so to speak, going quickly into retirement. Then the Generation X group, which is that middle-aged classification. And last but not least are the new entries into our workforce, the millennials. And more of the millennials will be taking on leadership roles in these undertakings in business, in healthcare, and specifically within urology practices. So as we take this discussion a little bit further with our second part of this series, this slide talks about some key characteristics of these next-gen leaders and the providers. And we'll certainly try to adapt this more so to the specialty of urologists as we go through our comments. First of all, as we move away from the baby boomers, and I shared in our first session that baby boomers are retiring at the rate of about 10,000 per day. So we're all getting at that age where we're either at or beyond retirement, and we're assuming retirement. So we're getting out of the workforce. Who's going to replace us? Well, it's going to be the Generation X for the next 10 years or so in leadership roles, and then we'll see the millennials more and more come into leadership roles and practicing. So what do these new generations look for, the millennials as well as the Generation X folks? Well, they look for efficiency and streamlined discussions. They're not opposed to some more innovative ways to work together, joint ownership, ways to streamline care. I mentioned in our first session that they're going to be much more amenable to telemedicine, for example, even in a urology setting. They're going to be amenable to varied transaction structures such as professional services agreements and co-management with hospitals and joint equity deals. As I mentioned in the first session, our firm at Coker Group does a tremendous amount of work with urologists and hospitals and other specialties as far as that goes, putting together transactions. And for the most part, we're still dealing with employment, although we do a number of PSAs. I think that may change in the future because employment is not the only way to do this. They're also going to be looking at technology and utilization of technology in the urology practice even more, particularly the way we communicate between providers and between the provider, the urologist, and the patient. Another example is less formal relationships. Generation X and even more so millennials embrace informal settings. They are not ones to dress up, for example, in coats and ties for the males or even suits for women. They are much more laid back, I guess you would say, but yet they're serious about their work. It has nothing to do with the work ethic as such, other than perhaps the work ethic is more of a balanced attitude, balance between work and personal life as such, whereas the baby boomers were all about work, 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 and the way you succeed is just work a little bit harder. Another area that's interesting is the third point here on this slide, marketing. Marketing is very much going to be existent, but it has to be short, to the point. The vehicle will be more, at least for the moment until something else is invented that's better, social media, high focus on tactical approaches, and not so much the long, drawn-out, billboard type approach or television ads of 1 minute. Much more succinct and to the point. Now, let's compare values and leadership styles This is going to be very important. Let's look at the three generations. First of all, baby boomers. Baby boomers value face-to-face patient interaction. I mentioned that in part one. Without question, we're most comfortable in that traditional setting. We're not as familiar with mobile devices and the utilization of them. We're getting there, but not nearly as user-friendly and as savvy as the subsequent generations, as we'll see in a minute. Traditional ways of delivering care are much more comfortable. We work longer hours than the baby boomers do. We just essentially, as I said earlier, work harder to make more or offset inefficiencies, etc. We're pretty hierarchical in terms of our structures. We like structure, we like discipline, and we grew up with that as children, whereas the subsequent generations have had less of that. We're competitive, that's for sure, and yet baby boomers are very focused on high quality care. I wish I had more time to tell you about a urologist that we're working with who's nearing retirement. He's in his 70s, and I've never seen someone that's more concerned about leaving a legacy of his practice for high quality care and patient appreciation, if you will, his appreciation of his patients. That is not to say subsequent generations don't care. I just think the baby boomers put more focus and certainly expound upon these things more so. Baby boomers believe in communication, and we work at it in the sense that we write and we voice it as opposed to a cryptic text message or whatnot. Again, nothing wrong with the latter. It's just a different way. It's a different leadership style. Baby boomers are more authoritative. They don't necessarily look for collaboration in leadership as much as the subsequent generations. So the conclusion here is, though baby boomers and next-gen leaders have different values and styles, both share an underlying goal of delivering high patient care. Let's look closer at the next-gen generation. First of all, in contrast to the baby boomers, they are more comfortable with technology. Electronic health records are no longer the great challenge that they were 10 years ago. And the next-gen generation folks clearly adapt to these elements of technology. They use them to manage their practice, the billing, the charting, you name it, all those things. They actually also look to try to trade off the culture of burnout for one of wellness and self-preservation. They value their personal time and being able to exercise and really get away from the practice, as opposed to the baby boomers who were unfortunately pretty much married to the practice, even almost literally at times. Not surprisingly, the next-gen generation looks for shorter hours, and they want to leverage technology and still be very productive, and that's a very good thing. They're looking for more transactional variedness in the overall process, including more flexibility in values and innovation within their practice. Their leadership style, therefore, focuses less on adhering to rules and historical processes and more on just getting the job done. Now, we'll see even more of that with the millennials here in just a second, but it's coming, that whole different attitude. So let's look at some final thoughts as it relates to baby boomers and this whole aspect of them coming on the scene. First of all, it's early in the transfer of baby boomers out of the workplace, but it's happening very quickly. And by the year 2030, just 10 years away, virtually every baby boomer will be out of the workplace, and they'll be assumed in leadership, management, urology practices, etc., by the Generation X leadership. And the Generation X leadership, which we covered in somewhat great detail will take on their personality. So we can expect rapid changes in our healthcare system in those next 10 years as this dynamic starts to change and take effect. As a result, all urology providers, whether they're APPs or physicians or really any other individual that works in the urology practice, is going to have to be aware of these changes and new expectations and ways of getting the job done. We should be receptive to modifications to the changing healthcare landscape because, believe me, it is about to happen. So, with those comments out of the way, we look forward to continuing the dialogue as appropriate in the future. If you do have a question concerning any of the comments that we made, here's the way to get a hold of us, and we appreciate the opportunity to share these thoughts with you. Thank you.